I'm preparing the main planks for finishing, and I've done a couple of things already. The first thing, I did a re-sanding of the planks, starting with 220 grit sandpaper and then moving up to 320 grit sandpaper with the random orbital sander. And then I finished up with a straight line hand sanding using 400 grit sandpaper. Now I've got to prepare the wood for staining. Now normally I don't like to stain because I like to select woods where the natural color is what I'm after. But in this case we're trying to match the mantle to the color of the wood flooring in the older part of the house, and so we're going to do some staining. Now there's basically two kinds of stain. One is a pigmented stain, which is where the pigment particles actually color the wood, but they are particles. So a pigmented stain is one where you have to stir it with a paint mixer. It's more or less very thin down paint, if you can think of it that way. Like I say, the pigment particles color the wood, but since they are particles, they do obscure some of the figure. The other type of stain is a transparent stain. Think of food coloring, for example, where you apply the stain and it dyes the wood, but all the figure shows through. Now, the type of transparent stain that I would like to use in this project is aniline dye, and because this wood has some great figure. I know it's a little difficult to see right now, but there's some real nice marble pattern here. There's some curl, you know, some flare, almost like the sun flaring out, and I would like to bring that out. So an aniline dye will help me to do that, but I use a water-based aniline dye. I mix the powders with water, and I come up with a very well, kind of a complex formula of colors to try and match. In this case, I'm trying to match this sample of color that comes from some cabinetry that'll be in the house, which also is the color of the flooring. And so I have made up various formulas of stain and tried different swatches of that color on some of this maple wood, and right now I know that I need to be somewhere between these colors right here. As you can see, there's a pretty good match right there. That particular formulation uses 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different color stains mixed in varying proportions to come up with this color, and then it's applied with the 1 wash coat of shellac, then 2 coats of the dye thinned 50-50, followed by it'll be followed by the finish. Now, because we're talking water-based stain, the water will have a tendency to raise the grain. That is, the water will soak into the wood and cause the fibers to expand, and when the water dries, the fibers stay in that expanded state. So that's a problem. We need to have nice smooth wood. So what we do is we raise the grain ourselves before we dye by spritzing water on the wood, and then after the wood is dry and rough again, I'll go ahead and I'll re-sand it to the 400 grit sandpaper very lightly, just to shave off those raised fibers, and then we'll be ready to go into the staining process. So we'll just spritz on some water here and let it soak in just a little bit, and then I'll wipe it off. I don't want to get too dry, but I don't want it puddling. I'm trying to replicate is what the stain will do, and I can already feel a roughness to this. After the wood dries, I'll go ahead and, like I say, I'll sand it down again with 400 grit on the sanding block, and then we'll be ready for our first wash coat of thin shellac. Having raised the grain by putting water on the surfaces and then sanding it back down, I used 320 grit with the random orbital sander and then followed up with a block sander 400 grit to get the whiskers down. Now I'm putting on what's called a wash coat of half-pound cut shellac. That's a half a pound of shellac flakes per gallon of denatured alcohol. It's very thin. I've discovered that with this particular wood, one wash coat is the way to go. And so I simply take a folded up cotton cloth and carefully wipe this on. Make sure I get every area. And what the wash coat does is it allows the stain to soak in rather evenly and prevent blotching. Sometimes where there's parts of the wood that are a little more porous than other parts, the stain blotches, and that doesn't look good. So if you use a wash coat, it gives you a little more even penetration of the stain. I also experimented with end grain and discovered that one wash coat on the end grain makes for the very best penetration of the stain. Of course, end grain tends to soak up anything more than face grain. And that's it. In a way, the moment of truth is when you put the stain onto the wood. Sometimes it seems like once you step off that cliff, you can't step back. But in fact, with aniline dyes, one of the beauties of an aniline dye is that if you don't have the color exactly right on the first application, you can adjust your mixture, come back and apply, and that second application will mix in with the first application, basically redissolve the dye, and you can do color correction. So we can work with this a little bit, but this is the first coat, and we're trying to use the mix that we made that matches closely, and we'll just see how that goes. We'll just apply this. I'm using one of these foam applicators. And I'm just going to apply it and let it sit for a bit as I work my way down the plank. And when I get to the other end of the plank, make sure there's no dry spots, and then wipe off. And then you just wipe it off. Good idea to use a latex glove when you do this, so you don't stain your hands. And one of the other nice things about aniline dye is if when this dries, if you find it's a little too dark, you can just come and wipe a coat of water, rub a coat of water in, and that will lighten the color. It basically removes some of the color from the wood. Make sure you don't get any dripping down the edges. And I'm going to for sure do another coat, if nothing else, just to even things out. Places where it may be soaked in a little more than other places. Sometimes what I've noticed with this particular mix, the green kind of separates out sometimes on the edges, so I might come along, blend that in. Not sure why that does that, but I have noticed it. So it's not quite as simple as maybe using a wiping stain out of a can, but it's a whole lot more flexible for you, the user. You recall when I trimmed up this little corner to match the rest of the piece. I said I was going to come back and color it, so here I am with a little bit of stain, dark mission brown color, just to kind of brown this up. And later on I can fine tune if I need to with some of my stain touch-up applicators that I have. Now here's a little tip about staining. What you see here is the raw stained maple, soft maple, using the stain mixture. And on this side here on the right, you see the stain with one coat of a mixture of varnish, tung oil, and boiled linseed oil. I just put that on, let it sit for about 20 minutes, and rubbed it in a little bit and wiped it off. What I'm trying to do is match this pigmented stained sample, and as you can see, I hope you can see, this raw stain looks very red, and it's a little alarming when you finish the staining and you say this doesn't match what I want. So don't despair. Put on a little finish. This particular place is going to be hidden, so I could experiment. This is where the curved lamination goes, and I could experiment a little bit, and got a pretty good color match here. And also notice how the figure in the wood comes out. You've got some curl down here, and it's just popping right out with that stain and walnut mix, or stain and oil mix. Now, I wasn't asked to plug this. I don't even know the author, but this is a great book to learn how to do finishing and learn the science behind finishing. It's called Understanding Wood Finishing. It's by Bob Flexner, and of all the finishing books I have, this one explains best how finish really works, kind of demystifies what you read on the back of the cans of finish to help you understand better. So I highly recommend it. Understanding Wood Finishing by Bob Flexner. Now there are a couple of places where I had to use a little bit of epoxy filler because this tree had quite a number of checks in it, and I didn't want someone running their finger across a sharp crack and getting a bad splinter, so I had to fill it, but it's very tough to match color. So what I'm going to do here is, before I put the finish on, I'm going to use a background marker. This particular marker is made by Mohawk Finishing. They're a professional finishing materials manufacturer. It's called Oak Golden Light, which is the same color as the sample stain I'm using. It doesn't match this reddish tone, but it matches where I'm going pretty well. And so I just simply, it's like a magic marker, put a little bit on the epoxy and let it dry, and later on when I come back and use my oil finish, it should blend in very well. Okay, my staining is done. I stained the maple, and although I didn't show it to you, I also stained the walnut with a special mixture to match the walnut that's going to be in the rest of the room. And now I've got it where I think I want it. I put on a couple of coats of stain, and I've used a cloth, wet cloth, to try to blend where the stain wasn't quite blended right. I think I got it where I want it. Now I'm going to use a mixture of 1/3 polyurethane varnish, 1/3 tung oil, and 1/3 boiled linseed oil to do the first of 3 coats of this mixture. And it's important when you mix this up to use boiled linseed oil, because it's got a dryer added to it that will help the tung oil to cure. And the way these finishes cure is not by evaporation. It's by actually a chemical change. When the oxygen hits the oil and the varnish, causes a chemical change to link the molecules together and make for a very durable and nice warm finish. So all I do is just dip my fingers in and rub it in. And there's no particular need to rub and rub and rub, but what you do want to get it into all the pores. And then I usually let it sit for 20 minutes or so to build a little bit, to start thickening a little bit so that more of it stays on the surface, because the next step is going to be to wipe it off. You always want to have a fully wiped off surface when you're done, and then you let that sit for 24 hours or so to cure before you do the next coat. I just have to take a minute from rubbing in all this oil and just show you what the oil and aniline dye combination does. Just look at how that flame and that figure, I think this must have been near the crotch of the tree, but it's taken what started out as a really rough piece of maple. It's turned it into something beautiful. You can see the curl in that. I'm hoping you can see this well. Unfortunately, you see the reflection on my lights too, so I'll try to avoid that. A little bit of bird's eye there. Some more flame. Really turns out nice. Now, of course, I'm going to wipe this down and it'll become duller, but after we put on 6 coats or so of this, it'll look very nice. I put 3 coats of the mixture of 1/3 polyurethane varnish, semi-gloss in this case, 1/3 tung oil, and 1/3 boiled linseed oil, letting each coat cure for a day. Now I'm going to do 3 coats of a mixture that is 50-50 boiled linseed oil and tung oil, and then I add a little bit, nothing scientific, a little bit of beeswax to the mixture while it's heated to give me a thick mixture that, you know, kind of like maple syrup, something like that, fairly thick. And then I can just rub in a thin coat of that and let that set up some and wipe it off. I'll do that 3 times, 3 days apart, or a day apart from each coat, and we'll see where we are. That probably will be all we need to do, but we'll take a look. The beeswax gives it a little bit of a sheen, which is nice. Gives a little bit of a tactile feel when you rub your fingers across it. It feels good. We'll just rub that in.